I never thought I'd hear the words, "You're just bitter, Mom." But that's exactly what my daughter Ella said to me, her eyes cold, her voice unwavering. She stood there side by side with him. David, my second husband, the man who'd betrayed me in ways she could never understand. She chose him over me. And when I saw the way she looked at me, it was like a knife in my heart, but I couldn't back down. I had to show her the truth. The man she adored, the man who promised to love and protect us, had been lying, stealing, manipulating. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration of our family. Instead, it became the night I exposed David for who he really was, and made Ella realize the cost of standing behind someone who didn't deserve her love. I used to think that the worst thing in the world would be losing my daughter, but I was wrong. The worst thing is watching her choose someone else over me, especially when that someone is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Ella had always been my baby, my only child. From the day she was born, I'd made every sacrifice for her. Every dream I had, every waking moment, it felt dedicated to giving her the best of everything I could offer. A happy home, a safe space. I worked 2 demanding jobs when her biological father walked out on us, leaving a gaping hole in our small world. I stayed up late countless nights helping her with school projects, holding her when she cried over broken friendships or teenage heartaches, driving her to soccer practice, to art class, to every activity that sparked a light in her eyes. I wanted her to have every opportunity to feel cherished and supported. But none of that seemed to matter to her, not anymore, not since David came into our lives. David. He had swept me off my feet with a whirlwind romance. He was charming, successful, seemingly kind. The kind of man I thought I deserved, the kind of partner I craved after the wreckage of my first failed marriage. He promised me stability, a future. He swore he'd always love Ella, my precious Ella, like his own daughter. He promised her a father's love, a steadfast presence, even though I emphasized that I didn't need him to be a replacement. She had me, and for a long time that had been enough for both of us. I should have known better. The red flags were there, fluttering subtly in the breeze of his charm, but I was too blinded by hope, too desperate for a happy ending to see them clearly. The first sign of serious trouble, the first tremor in the foundation of our blended family, came when I noticed the subtle, insidious shift in Ella's allegiance. It wasn't obvious at first, more like a creeping vine. He'd do little things, buying Ella extravagant gifts without consulting me, presents I couldn't afford and often felt were inappropriate. He'd let her skip her curfew, siding with her against my established rules. He indulged her every whim, painting himself as the cool parent, the understanding one, while I was increasingly cast in the role of the strict, overbearing mother. I tried to tell myself it was sweet, his way of bonding, maybe even a little overly generous in his desire to win her affection. But then I began to notice the tension he actively created between us. "Why don't you just let Ella enjoy herself?" "Lena," David would say, his tone one of gentle reproof whenever I tried to set a boundary or asked him to support my parenting decisions. "She's been through so much already with the divorce and her father leaving. Let her be happy. She deserves it." And I foolishly let it go. At first, because a part of me thought he was right. Ella did deserve to be happy, and I wanted so desperately for this new family to work. But then something began to change in her, a more profound and disturbing transformation. She became distant, withdrawn. When I would try to sit down with her to talk about her day at school, her friends, her life, anything really, she would brush me off, make excuses, her eyes darting to her phone. She started spending hours locked in her room, earbuds perpetually in the sound of music or muted conversations leaking from beneath her door. I didn't press. I told myself to give her space, that it was teenage angst, but deep down, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. This felt different, colder. The real trouble, the moment I knew something was deeply wrong, started on her 16th birthday. David, with his usual flair for grand gestures, had planned a surprise dinner for her at an incredibly fancy, expensive restaurant downtown. When Ella came downstairs that evening, dressed in a stunning new red dress, another gift from David, I presumed, she was glowing. But there was something off about her smile, something in her eyes. She wasn't just happy. She was triumphant, proud, but proud of what I had no idea then. The dinner itself was a lavish affair, but I couldn't shake the heavy feeling of unease that settled over me. David was at his most charming, attentive to Ella, laughing, showering her with compliments, doing his absolute best to make her feel like she was the undisputed center of the universe. And Ella, my daughter, barely said a word to me all evening. She didn't even make eye contact. It was as if I were invisible, a ghost at their celebratory feast. After dinner, we returned home, and as had become his habit, David made himself comfortable on the couch with a large glass of expensive wine. Ella disappeared into her room without so much as a good night to either of us. The silence she left behind was deafening. "Give her time, Lena," David said, his voice soft, placating. "She's going through a lot. It's a big year for her. Sweet 16, you know." But something about his smooth words, his easy dismissal of my concerns, made me deeply uneasy. "She doesn't talk to me anymore, David," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though a storm of frustration and hurt was rising within me. "She's not the same girl. Something is wrong." David turned to me, then his face a mask of gentle understanding. But it wasn't real. I saw it clearly in his eyes that night. There was something else there. Something calculating. Something I couldn't quite grasp yet. Something that chilled me to the bone. "She's a teenager, Lena," he said with a dismissive shrug. "They go through phases. They push boundaries. You can't expect her to be your little girl forever. You're being a bit oversensitive, don't you think?" I looked at him, then really looked at him past the charming facade, and I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach that I didn't just have a problem with Ella's behavior. I had a problem with us, with him. But I kept it to myself. I still clung to the hope that maybe it was just a phase. Maybe I was being too sensitive, too paranoid. A few weeks later, I discovered the devastating truth, and it was far worse than I could have ever imagined. It was a Saturday afternoon when it all started to unravel, the carefully constructed facade of our happy family beginning to fray at the edges. I was in my small home office going through some overdue paperwork when I noticed Ella's phone lying on the desk beside my laptop, screen unlocked. Just sitting there, almost like it was daring me to take a peek, to cross a line I'd never crossed before. I hesitated for a long moment. I'd always prided myself on respecting her privacy, on fostering an environment of trust. But after everything that had been happening, her increasing distance, her inexplicable coldness toward me and David's subtly undermining behavior, a desperate curiosity, a mother's intuition screaming that something was terribly amiss, got the better of me. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding, and saw the notifications lighting up the screen. Text messages. From David. But it wasn't just the fact that they were texting that caught my attention. It was the content, the tone, the intimacy that bled from the words. The flirty emojis, the late-night texts filled with inside jokes, the way they casually joked about keeping secrets from me, about their special surprises. I felt my chest tighten, a band of ice constricting my lungs as I scrolled further, my hands beginning to shake. "Can't wait for our secret getaway this weekend." My special girl, one text from David read, complete with a winking emoji. "Don't tell Mom, she'll just freak out and ruin it for us." Another one from him, said, followed by a string of laughing faces. And then the one that made my blood run cold. "I love you, Ella, more than you know. You're my everything." Signed with a heart. My heart didn't just drop, it shattered. My daughter, my sweet Ella, was exchanging texts with David, my husband, that read like a clandestine romance. The implications were horrifying. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely put the phone down. I could scarcely breathe, my mind racing a vortex of shock, betrayal, and a sickening fear. What did this mean? Was she truly in love with him, a man nearly 3 times her age? Or had he, with his practiced charm and manipulative ways, groomed her, twisted her young affections into this abomination? I spent the rest of that agonizing day watching her from a distance, a silent, heartbroken observer. My thoughts were a tangled, chaotic mess, my emotions a raging storm within me. Part of me, the raw, wounded mother, wanted to confront her immediately, to scream, to demand answers. But another calmer part of me, the part that knew how volatile and defensive a 16-year-old could be, knew I needed to be careful, strategic. She wasn't the same sweet, open little girl she used to be. The trust between us, already fragile, had been irrevocably broken, and I couldn't just barge in and expect her to confess. She was sitting in the living room later, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious, it seemed, to the cataclysmic storm brewing around her, the storm that was about to engulf her. I watched her for a long moment, trying to see her through clear, objective eyes, trying to find the innocent, loving daughter I remembered. But now she looked like a stranger, someone who had, whether knowingly or unknowingly, betrayed me in the deepest way possible. And worse, someone who was walking blindly, trustingly into the predatory arms of a man who only saw her as a pawn in his own sick, twisted game. That night, sleep was impossible. I stayed up late, fueled by a desperate, nauseating energy, poring over everything I could find. Old text messages on our shared family plan emails. I had access to any documents David had carelessly left lying around his home office. And I found more than just illicit secret messages. I found receipts, airline tickets for 2 in his name and Ella's, a reservation at a luxury boutique hotel in a nearby city for a king suite, for 2. David and Ella had been planning a trip together, a romantic getaway. My hands trembled violently as I looked at the date on the flight details. It was for the upcoming weekend, her birthday weekend. The trip was scheduled for the very same weekend David had told me with such convincing sincerity that he would be out of town on an urgent business trip. And what did I find? Evidence of a secret, intimate getaway. Just the 2 of them. A disgusting secret that would have remained hidden forever if my desperate maternal fear hadn't driven me to dig deeper. I felt physically sick to my stomach. The betrayal was a vile, coiling serpent in my gut. The next morning, armed with this sickening proof, I confronted her. She was sitting at the kitchen table, calmly sipping her coffee, scrolling through her phone, as if it were just another ordinary day. I stood in the doorway for a moment, arms crossed, watching her, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. "Ella," I said quietly, my voice low but firm, cutting through the morning stillness. "We need to talk." She didn't look up from her phone immediately. "What's wrong, Mom?" she asked, her tone casual, almost bored. I found something, I said, walking slowly into the kitchen, placing her phone still open to those damning texts down on the table directly in front of her. Beside it, I laid out the printed copies of the flight and hotel reservations. "Something I think you should see. Something you need to explain." She blinked, confusion flashing across her face as she looked from my grim expression to the items on the table. Her face paled dramatically when she recognized the texts, the photos, the incriminating reservations. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking young, vulnerable, and utterly trapped. "Mom, I can explain," she said quickly, her voice cracking, her eyes darting nervously around the room. But the hesitation was there, too much of it. The guilt was written all over her face. "You don't have to explain, Ella," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, though inside I was screaming. I was trying desperately to keep my own roiling emotions in check for her sake. "I already know. You've been lying to me, hiding things from me. And worse, so much worse, you've been letting David use you, manipulate you." Her eyes flickered from the evidence on the table, then back to me, filled with a dawning horror. I never wanted you to find out like this," she said softly, her voice so small, almost lost like a child's. "I didn't know what to do. He said you wouldn't understand. I didn't want to disappoint you." I took a deep, shaky breath, forcing back the hot tears that threatened to spill. I hadn't raised my daughter to be this way, to be so easily manipulated, so utterly deceived. But there she was, caught in a disgusting web of lies and deceit that I, her mother, hadn't been able to protect her from. "You didn't disappoint me, Ella," I said quietly, the words feeling inadequate, hollow. "But you let him betray you. You've let him use you to get what he wants, to play out some sick fantasy. You have to see that. You have to understand the gravity of this." She looked down at the table, her shoulders slumped silent for a long, agonizing moment. Then finally she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I thought he loved me, Mom. He told me he did. He made me feel special, important, like I was the only one that mattered in his world. I didn't think it was all just a game to him. I didn't think he was capable of this. Ella, I said softly, my own voice breaking now, the carefully constructed dam of my composure finally cracking. He doesn't love you, not in any real healthy way. He's been using you from the very start. He's been grooming you, manipulating you with his charm and his money, and you've been so blinded by it all, so desperate for what you thought was affection that you didn't see it. And now look at what he's done. Look at what he's turned you into, what he's done to our family. I stepped back, giving her space to process, to breathe. This isn't just about him, sweetheart. I continued, my voice gentle but firm. This is about you, about your self-worth, your future. You don't need to be anyone's pawn, anyone's dirty little secret. You deserve love, that's real love, that's honest. Not this grotesque charade built on lies and manipulation. She lifted her gaze to meet mine, her beautiful eyes so like her father's, wet with unshed tears, filled with a devastating combination of pain and confusion. I don't know what to do, Mom, she whispered, her voice trembling. I feel so lost, so stupid. I reached across the table and took her cold, trembling hand, pulling her gently into a hug as she finally broke down, sobbing into my shoulder. You're not lost, darling, I murmured, stroking her hair, my own tears now flowing freely. And you are not stupid. You've just forgotten how strong you are, how smart you are. And I'll help you remember. We'll get through this together. That afternoon, the house felt like it was holding its breath, steeped in a heavy, charged silence. The quiet between Ella and me wasn't uncomfortable, not anymore. It was a quiet understanding, a shared grief, an unspoken acknowledgement that things were never going to be the same again. I had exposed a horrifying truth, and now there was no turning back, no pretending that this monstrous betrayal hadn't occurred. But Ella wasn't the only one who needed to hear the unvarnished truth to face the consequences. David hadn't come home from work yet. I wasn't sure whether I was more anxious to see him, to finally unleash the full force of my fury and disgust, or if I was dreading the inevitable ugly confrontation that would follow. But I knew one thing for sure, this was it. There would be no more pretending, no more tiptoeing around his fragile ego. No more swallowing my own pain for the sake of a false peace. The truth in all its ugliness needed to come out, and I would make damn sure of it. When David finally walked through the front door later that evening, whistling a cheerful tune, the first thing he did was smile, his trademark charming smile. He had that same confident, unshakable, almost arrogant look about him. He looked at me, his smile faltering slightly at my grim expression, then glanced over at Ella, who was still sitting pale and withdrawn at the kitchen table. Her head bowed, refusing to meet his eyes. "Hey, babe," he said to Ella, his voice smooth as silk, utterly oblivious, it seemed, to the emotional wreckage he had caused. "What's going on? You look upset. Rough day at school?" I stood from the counter where I'd been leaning my hands on my hips, every muscle in my body coiled tight, facing him head on. "You need to sit down, David," I said, my voice calm, cold but firm as steel. David furrowed his brow, his smile vanishing completely, replaced by a look of wary confusion. "What's this all about? Lena, did something happen? Is Ella okay?" I didn't waste time on pleasantries. The time for that was long past. "You've been lying, David. Lying to me, lying to Ella. You've been using my daughter, grooming her, and I'm not going to stand by and let you destroy her life, her spirit any longer." He laughed, then a short, sharp, nervous chuckle that held no amusement, only a dawning panic. "What on earth are you talking about? Lena, you're overreacting as usual. You're being hysterical. I don't know what kind of crazy dramatic stuff Ella's been telling you, but I love her. You know I do. I would never hurt her." "Love." I scoffed at the sound, dripping with contempt. "You don't know the meaning of the word. You don't love her. You've been manipulating her for months, maybe longer. You've been lying to her, to both of us, systematically turning her against me. And now, David, it's time for you to face the consequences of your despicable actions." He stood there frozen for a moment, his eyes flickering nervously between me and Ella, who still hadn't looked up. For the first time since I'd known him, that confident, polished facade began to visibly crack. I pulled out the manila envelope, the same one I had shown Ella earlier that day, filled with the irrefutable proof of his betrayal, and slapped it hard onto the kitchen table in front of him. "Take a look, David. Go on. It's all in there. The text messages, the photos, the airline tickets, the hotel reservations, the bank transactions for gifts you told me you couldn't afford. You can't lie your way out of this anymore. You can't charm your way out of this. The game is over." David's eyes flickered to the damning envelope, and I saw a raw flash of genuine panic in his face. He quickly looked at Ella, who had remained small and quiet through the entire exchange, her silence more damning than any accusation. "Ella," he said, his voice dropping, attempting a softer, more intimate tone. "Sweetheart, you don't need to listen to her. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. Your mother she's just bitter and jealous. I've only ever been doing what I thought was best for you. For us. I never, ever wanted to hurt you." Ella finally looked up then. Her beautiful eyes, usually so bright and full of life, were wide, filled with a devastating mix of raw hurt, profound disillusionment, and a dawning steely anger. "Best for who?" "David," she asked, her voice trembling but clear. "Best for you or best for me? Did you ever once stop to think about me in all of this? About what you were doing to me?" "To my mother." David's expression faltered, his confident mask slipping further, his shoulders sagging almost imperceptibly. He opened his mouth to speak, but the usual smooth words, the easy lies, wouldn't come. He looked lost, trapped. I watched a grim satisfaction warring with the deep ache in my heart as the full weight of the situation finally seemed to settle upon him. David, the master manipulator, was caught. For the first time, I saw him for who he really was, not a charming, successful man, but a weak, pathetic, predatory coward, utterly incapable of facing the consequences of his own vile actions. Ella stood up slowly from the table, her movements stiff, her hands shaking as she picked up the documents I had placed before David, her eyes scanning the proof of his betrayal. "Why, David?" she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Why would you do this to me, to us? I trusted you. I thought you cared about me." He looked at her, then his eyes filled with a desperate pleading guilt. But there was nothing he could say. He was caught red-handed and there was no way out. For the first time since I'd met him, his polished, invulnerable exterior was completely shattered. I didn't want you to know the truth about other things," he said, finally, his voice barely above a whisper, his gaze darting away. "I thought I could keep you in the dark. I thought I could have everything your mother, the life I wanted." Ella shook her head, tears finally welling up and spilling down her pale cheeks. "You didn't want me," she said, her voice cracking with pain. "You used me. All this time, all those special talks, those secret promises. I was just another thing for you to control, another conquest, wasn't I?" The silence between us stretched on heavy, unbearable. And finally, David broke it, his voice strained, defeated. "I'm sorry," he said, the words sounding hollow, inadequate. "I am so sorry, Ella. Lena, I didn't mean for it to go this far, but you need to understand. I never wanted to hurt either of you." Ella stood there, her gaze fixed on him, her expression unreadable for a long moment before she turned to me. She looked so small, then so young and lost, like a child caught in a terrifying storm. And then, just as quickly as she had stood up with such fragile defiance, she seemed to collapse back into the chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, heartbroken sobs. I stepped forward instantly, my own anger momentarily forgotten, my motherly instincts taking over. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close, holding her tight as she wept, and for the first time in a long, long while, I let myself cry too, for her pain, for my own, for the death of the family I had tried so hard to build. David, standing across from us, took a few hesitant steps backward, as if unsure of what to do, how to handle the raw, unfiltered emotion, an unfiltered emotion, H. He stood there, a man whose carefully constructed world had just come crashing down around him, finally, perhaps realizing the irreparable damage his lies, his manipulations, his betrayals had caused. "You've lost her, David," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face as I held my weeping daughter. "You've lost her trust, her love, her respect, and you've lost me too. This is over. Our marriage, this sham of a family. It's over." He didn't argue. He couldn't. There was nothing left to say. The truth, in all its devastating clarity, had finally silenced him. The days that followed the confrontation were some of the hardest, most emotionally draining of my life. The house, once filled with David's booming laughter and confident presence, a presence I now recognized as performative and hollow, felt eerily empty, cavernous. It was like the air itself was mourning the death of our fractured family. David left. He didn't fight me on the divorce. He didn't beg for forgiveness or make excuses. He just packed a single bag. His usual arrogance deflated and walked out of our lives, leaving behind a trail of shattered trust and broken hearts. Surprisingly, I didn't feel the immediate relief I had anticipated. Instead, I felt the heavy, crushing weight of everything I had just witnessed, everything I had been forced to expose, the ugliness of the truth settling like a pall over our home. But Ella was a different story. Her journey was just beginning. She didn't speak to me much in those first raw days that followed David's departure. She retreated into the sanctuary of her room, shutting the door firmly against the world against me, as if she were trying to block out the painful reality of what had happened. I didn't push. My heart ached for her, for the confusion and betrayal she was grappling with, but I knew she needed time. Time to process the enormity of David's deception, time to grieve the man she had trusted, the man she had in her own innocent way, perhaps even loved the man she had called family. I made sure she had everything she needed, her favorite comfort foods, an endless supply of tissues, her beloved books, and most importantly, the space and silence she seemed to crave. 3 long, quiet days later, she emerged from her room. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen from crying. Her face pale, but she was standing straighter than she had in months. There was a new, fragile resolve in her posture. She looked at me, and I could see the immense weight she still carried on her young shoulders, but there was also a flicker of something else, a nascent strength. "Mom," she said, her voice hoarse, a mere whisper. "I'm so sorry for everything, for not listening to you, for believing him." I walked toward her, my own eyes welling up, and pulled her into a tight, fierce hug. "Oh, Ella, my sweet girl, you don't have anything to apologize for. You didn't cause this. You didn't ask for any of this. But I let him in." "Mom," she whispered into my shoulder, her voice choked with tears. "I let him get close. I let him hurt me. I let him hurt us. I chose him over you." "You didn't know, sweetheart," I said softly, stroking her hair. "You didn't know the truth about him. You were young, you were vulnerable, and he preyed on that. You just saw what he wanted you to see, what he was so skilled at projecting." "But I should have known better," she replied, pulling back slightly. Shaking her head, her gaze filled with self-reproach. "I should have seen the signs. You tried to warn me subtly. I was just too blind, too trusting, too caught up in the fantasy he created." I cupped her face in my hands, forcing her to meet my eyes to see the unwavering love and belief I held for her. "You weren't blind, Ella. You were manipulated. And sometimes even the smartest, strongest people can be deceived by a skilled liar. Love, or what you thought was love, doesn't always come with a clear warning label. But what matters now, the only thing that matters, is how you move forward from this, how we move forward together. It took time, of course. Healing is never a linear process, but slowly, painstakingly, the walls around Ella's wounded heart began to crumble. She started talking again, really talking. About her fears, her confusion, her anger, the shame she felt about how lost and isolated she had felt in that toxic dynamic with David. It was raw, it was painful to hear, to witness, but it was honest. And that honesty, that willingness to confront the ugliness was exactly what we both needed to begin to heal. We went to therapy, together, and as we sat in that quiet, neutral room week after week, both of us confronting the wreckage of our hearts, our trust, our family, I realized something profound. I wasn't just her mother in that moment offering comfort and guidance. I was her partner in healing, walking alongside her as she navigated the treacherous path back to herself. And she was before my very eyes becoming her own woman, stronger, wiser, more resilient than I had ever known her to be, than perhaps even she knew she could be. David's departure didn't just leave a void. It paradoxically opened up new possibilities for Ella, a space for her to rediscover herself without his suffocating influence. She enrolled in an online course on digital marketing, something she had expressed interest in years ago but had put off. She took up painting again, a passion she had loved as a child but had abandoned during her tumultuous teenage years. She started spending more time with genuine friends, rebuilding healthy connections, and slowly, tentatively, she learned to trust her own judgment, her own instincts again. As for me, I found myself standing taller, breathing a little easier. The constant tension that had hummed beneath the surface of my life for so long began to dissipate. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, offering the kind of support, empathy, and non-judgmental listening ear that I wished I had given myself more of during those difficult years. I realized that healing wasn't just about fixing the pain or erasing the past. It was about growing stronger in spite of it, transforming an unfiltered trauma into wisdom and resilience. Months passed, seasons changed, and while we still had our moments of sadness, of quiet reflection on the betrayal and the loss, the light began to shine through again, brighter and warmer than before. Ella and I had weathered a terrible storm, one that had threatened to tear us apart, but we had emerged from it. Not unscathed, no, but stronger, more deeply connected, more honest with ourselves and with each other. One cool evening, as we sat on the porch of our now peaceful home sipping herbal tea and watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Ella looked at me with a soft, genuine smile. "You know, Mom," she said, her voice thoughtful, "I think I'm finally starting to see the world for what it really is. Not through someone else's distorted lens, but through my own eyes, and I'm starting to trust what I see." I smiled back, my heart full to bursting. That's the most important lesson any of us can learn, sweetheart. To always trust your own eyes, your own intuition, and your own heart. They will rarely lead you astray. Ella leaned her head on my shoulder, a comfortable, familiar gesture from her childhood that had been absent for too long. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered. "Thank you for always believing in me, for fighting for me, even when I couldn't see the truth myself, even when I pushed you away." I kissed her forehead gently, my arm around her. "Always, Ella." Always. As for David, he didn't return. He sent a few half-hearted, manipulative attempts to reach out in the months that followed, texts filled with excuses, emails professing his undying and utterly unbelievable remorse. But I never replied. Ella, after one final empowering therapy session, blocked him on all platforms. His time in our lives, his power over us had well and truly ended. The family we thought we were had fallen apart, shattered by deceit. But the family we were becoming, just the two of us, mother and daughter, forged in the fires of betrayal and rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and unconditional love, that family was stronger, more authentic than it ever had been before. Sometimes the greatest betrayals come from those we trust the most, those we let into the innermost sanctums of our hearts and our homes. It's a devastating realization. But as mothers, we possess an innate, ferocious instinct to protect our children, even when it means confronting the most difficult, heart-wrenching truths, even when it means making choices that cause us immense pain. And in doing so, in choosing truth over illusion, in choosing their well-being over false peace, we not only shield them from further harm, but also, crucially, show them how to reclaim their own power, their own voice, their own inherent worth. because in the end, we are the ones who shape their world, who help them navigate its complexities. Not through anger, not through rage, though those emotions are valid and may fuel our initial fight, but ultimately through unwavering love, through boundless patience, and through the profound courage to help them see and accept the truth, no matter how painful it may be. That is the true revenge against those who seek to harm our children, to help our children heal, grow, and thrive despite it all.